TFB TV, guess what Americans and Afghans of the 1700s and 1800s had in common? We ghosted redcoats. Well, what we have here is an Afghan long rifle. And I want to talk about this a little bit. It's very interesting for a number of different ways. It was a very peculiar weapon for a very peculiar set of tactics. All right, so it's commonly known as the Jezail, but that's a foreign word for it. In Afghanistan, it's known as a tortobak or a siyah tofang in Dari or Pashtun, essentially a black gun. All right, you know, you can look up where they were made locally. A lot of them were made from captured locks and barrels, stocks as well. As you've noticed, it has a very peculiar stock here. And this goes into the employment of the weapon system, all right? These were employed essentially as benchrest guns. You were not, because of the length of the barrel, the rifle barrel was so long, these were not meant to be fired like this. They were meant to be shot from rocks or from other supports, essentially as benchrest, all right? And you were able to put them on a rock and then shoot them like that. And their peculiar stock allowed you, there's a number of different reasons why people say they have the stock. Some say it's the easier carry on a horse, you know, you can do this, walk with it, that kind of thing. But you could put the stock up against here and then lean in real nice and tight and get a good sight picture, which there were sights on here. There's a rear sight and a front sight, a peephole, all right? Some of the interesting characteristics about the Afghan long rifle, well, first of all, it's rifled and it has a long barrel. That is extremely important because it completely outranged and outclassed the British troops with the Flintlock Brown Besses that they had, because these things were accurate out to 300, 400 meters on point targets. The British essentially had a 100 meter, 150 meter area fire weapon because they were smoothbore, all right? So the Afghans could pick off British troops singly, individually, and in groups, which was another thing that was going against the British, and that they fought in these mass columns. They just could not adapt to the Afghan way of war. So you're able to, you know, if there's a bunch of British down there, and if they're in this valley here, you know, I can pick off a British formation at 500, 400 meters, a mass target, whereas the British couldn't do anything. They couldn't touch the Afghans who were up here in the hills and in the mountains, all right? Some of the other characteristics, you'll notice it doesn't have a trigger guard, all right? The trigger guard is absent for about 50% of the examples that we've seen and you can see on the internet, but it just doesn't have one. A traditional one does not have a trigger guard, which is an interesting aspect there, probably just because they didn't realize it. Another point here is the sling only goes about halfway. You can really only shoulder carry this thing, nothing really more than that. For reloading it, we've got this guy, which you'd probably have to pop out from cover. This is hard to get out, but you've got this extremely long ramrod for the barrel. And if you were loading it, you'd have to pop it in through here and insert it down this way, pour your powder in, slam it down, boom, boom, and then take it out for your next round. The way the Afghans were fighting, this wasn't a disadvantage because they were in the hills and they were behind rocks. So you could easily step back to load behind rocks. You didn't have to, you know, the way they were fighting, it wasn't necessary to be very quick as long as they could get their shots off. Getting this thing in here can be kind of tough. It's there, but I'll deal with that later. So what we did today on TFB TV is we actually took this hiking, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to simulate, you know, what was it like to carry this thing in the mountains, and what was it like to go up a mountain pass and go over the rocks and actually carry it. What was the best way to carry it? And you'll see it in the later part of this movie when we talk about this going up the mountain. I'd really like to thank Ventura Munitions for helping us with the support of the channel, and I hope you enjoy the hike up the mountain. None of the fighting that we're talking about that these guns were used was on this particular hill or in this part of Kabul. The fighting that we're talking about where the British were in 1842 was actually over there. If you remember last time I was talking about Tiva Mountain, Azmai Mountain, Goya Azmai, it was actually over there in the distance, and you can't see it very well from here. But that's where the British camp was that the British eventually left. And there's a lot of fighting going on over there, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. But when the British left, they actually went this way. You can't see it right now, but they actually went on the road from Kabul to Jalalabad, which is still in active service today. And they actually went to the east towards Jalalabad, where they were trying to reach the garrison there. But anyways, back to the Afghan long rifle. So carrying it, a couple things I've noticed so far. There's different ways to carry it. I mean, you can sling it like this, which is all right. Everyone knows about slinging a rifle. This sometimes gets tiring after a bit. In addition, this thing is just super long. So when you're walking with it, it creates a sort of a target. And the Afghan tribesmen, the Pashtun tribesmen back then, they realized this. They were extremely tactically proficient. They knew exactly, what they wanted. And they knew exactly what they wanted to gain out of fighting the British. So they would have known that this was a big target because it's thick enough. It also just screams rifle to anybody in the valley. Not that the British who couldn't even hit them would care. So another way is carry it like this, at your hip, at your side, like that. Something I've noticed, it's pretty cold outside right now. It's gonna warm up, but it was raining this morning, so it's pretty cold, which it would have been extremely cold in October, November, and December of 1842, the time in which the British companies were massacred on their way to Jalalabad, and in which the time frame that we're interested in. It would have been extremely cold. It would have been dead of winter in Kabul. It probably would have been snowing as well. Lots of rain for sure. So what I noticed is this, the barrel gets cold after a while. So if you're carrying it like this, your hands might get frostbite in extremely cold temperatures. So one way to go against that, you could wrap the sling like this, or you could wrap your hand in cloth to put it on there. And this goes back to even today with modern militaries. Something that's known as instant frostbite or contact frostbite, I think. When you touch a modern weapon that has aluminum or steel on it, your hands get, sometimes you get frostbite, and this is taught in the Marine Corps' Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport. So you can carry it like this, which I've found to be one of the better ways, or you can also carry it in the left hand if this hand gets tired. The great thing about this style is that you can also run with this. If I'm running, like up a hill, like this, I can run with the rifle as well. And I can switch hands if I need to, all right? Another style, you could carry it like this, but the problem is these things are so long, so they're very front heavy. So if you're carrying it like this, you'd have to almost bring the rifle down to here in order to effectively balance it correct. If you're carrying it over here, the lock and the stock don't have much weight on them. So if you're carrying it here, the barrel is going to dip down a lot, and you're going to have issues with the weight going down here. Another way, you could also carry it like this over your shoulder, which there's nothing wrong with it. The thing to be aware of is that it's also very front heavy, unlike a British Brown Bess, which probably would have been easier to walk at the right shoulder or the left shoulder. So another very important thing to be aware of, on the early Afghan long rifles, there's no trigger guard. So whatever way you were carrying it, you have to be careful that you're watching the trigger. Because if your trigger is damaged, you're donezo. Another thing to be aware of, you can see I'm panting pretty heavily, going straight up this slope. But look at the ground. If you look at the ground, it's muddy. Back down there, my shoes are all muddy. Can you imagine trying to get a British 6-pounder artillery piece up this very slope? Never mind that, just getting a whole column of troops with everything they have and they need to fight with up this slope. It would be very difficult. All right, and that's what compounded the problems for the British as well. They had this heavy equipment, they had this heavy food supplies, they had camp followers, they had all this stuff, and they're trying to cross these mountains on the way to Jalalabad. Meanwhile, you have these sheep, or these baza, and you'd probably have to go with them as well. Uh-oh, that one almost got ghosted by a fallen stone. Nice shepherd. So another thing I want to mention is I've got this backpack on. Part of it is practicality. It's got water, stuff I need for today. However, I'm trying to simulate what a Pashtun tribesman back then might have carried, similar in weight, on a daily expedition against the British. He probably would have had powder and ball in sacks, maybe tied around his waist or his belt, kamarband. He also would have had maybe some water, and they had, waterproof containers back then. Probably would have had a dagger or a shamshir as well. And that would have been used to close with and destroy, because you can't use this thing at close distance. This is a long distance martial arm.